All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to all of you joining in from different parts of the world. Very excited to have you over joining us for another exciting Insights with upGrad session. And today we have a very exciting guest. Well, if you've attended his previous session, welcome back. Satyajit, people love you. And and if this is the first time, I'm sure you're going to have a great time listening from him talk about how you can rise up the ranks in the product domain. So while just before I start introducing Satyajit, who is the speaker for today, I would like to tell you about two quick rules. Use the chat box when you have any questions about the audio video quality, or there are some in-session questions that Satyajit throws at you, or and use the Q&A box when you want Satyajit to answer questions at the end of the presentation. So we have time allocated for Q&A, an AMA session or an Ask Me Anything session, if you'd like to call that, with Satyajit. So feel free to ask your questions then. All right, with that, let me also start a very quick poll to understand a little bit more about all of you here. What's the years of experience you have? What's the outcome you're expecting from today's session so that it can help Satyajit navigate the whole presentation in a more directed fashion. All right, just press those two buttons very quickly. We're awaiting responses from all of you here. Half of you have responded. I think Satyajit, you can see the live results.
I can, yeah. It's a pretty evenly split group.
Right. I think it's like 20 across, right? um, that's great to know. All right. That's a very balanced audience. So you essentially have people across the designations that you would be talking about. So that's a really interesting thing to know. And most of them are here to understand if they can build their career or upskill themselves in this domain. That said, quickly introducing the speaker for today, Satyajit is the director, product management at Google, and he has led teams and organizations that build awesome products and businesses at the intersection of tech and media. And he's worked with some amazing teams on building and scaling multiple 1 billion plus monthly average user products. And he continues to push innovation and creativity across the dimensions of technology, art, business, and media. With that, Satyajit, the stage is yours.
Right. Thanks, Megha. I hope everyone can see the presentation. I hope it
Right.
looks good. Someone, if you can't, type in the chat and let me know. But otherwise, I'm going to go through the deck. This is I should mention this is a topic I'm excited about. I feel like I've been answering this question in some form or the other for almost 12, 13 years now. And I'll say that this is one of those things where I think all of us are still figuring out the answer for ourselves. But it's a topic that I've thought a lot about. I've had mentors give me advice on quite a bit. I've seen peers and sort of people that have reported to me work through these issues. So how to sort of think about career growth as a product manager, how to rise up in the product domain, is something I'm excited to talk about and hopefully share some ideas with you. This is one of those topics that everyone has questions and everyone's experience is unique. So I'll go through the slides, but yeah, I'm happy to take questions either at the end or even as I go through it if something sort of jumps out at you. All right, so let me start. I always have one of these obligatory "Who am I and what do I know about this" slides. Mainly to give you a sense of context of where I'm coming from and some of the things that I've done. So my background, I started as a software engineer. I primarily worked in a few small startups. I decided to go to business school, and after business school, I've basically been on the product ladder um, um, in Google in a variety of different products. So I put some of them over here. I worked on Chrome. I worked on TV ads. I worked on YouTube twice. I was a PM for games, first on Google Plus and then Google Play. I've spent the bulk of my sort of PM career at Google on Google Search. So I've been responsible for different parts of Google Search. I've both sort of done products that are 0 to 1, as well as products that have had massive scale and sort of scaling them even further. Um, I've a lot of my career I've been an ICPM. A lot of my career I've been a manager. I've been a manager of managers, and so I've seen sort of different drafts that people have had in their careers over time. I've also sort of seen different career paths where people come in from very different backgrounds into product management, and then again think very differently about where they want to take their careers, right? Like where do they end up? Um, and so I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll talk a little bit about the ladder and how people should think about this. Um, but that'll give you some context about where I'm coming from as I go through this presentation. I always say this: product management, I feel like is an amazing job. I feel like those of us who are doing it, it's an amazing intersection of technology, people, business, design. It's a great training ground for decision making, but with it comes this awesome responsibility. And the responsibility extends not just to your product, your team, your company, but given how flexible it is, you sort of need to take it on yourself as well, because uh, navigating your career and product um, can actually be fairly challenging. I think there's this fairly famous saying, which is, there's a difference between 20 years of experience and 1 year's experience 20 times. One of the things you should think about in your product career is, how am I progressing? How am I growing? How am I sort of upskilling at every single point? Because that's almost critical for growth as a PM. Uh, Given this movie's coming out, I thought this was an appropriate slide. The thing I'll mention is there are many, many ways to both get into product as well as be awesome at it, right? So all of these sort of, there are, even if these things look similar, everyone can do their product job in very, very different ways and be successful in very, very different ways. Um, I'll, the first section of this presentation, I'll go over sort of what I think of as the conventional expectations of the PM job ladder. And the thing I'll mention is, as I go through these, and I go through a PM ladder in general, think about how on each of these dimensions you can grow and apply it to the different parts of the ladder. So let me start with this. So this is, I grabbed this ladder off the web, but every company, every career path will have something of this sort, which is when you start as a junior PM, you sort of go through this progression, right? You start as generally everyone will have a title like associate product manager, you become a product manager, and then different companies, might have like a PM1, PM2, PM3. Some companies will take you a senior PM title. Some companies have a lead PM title. Google, for example, does not, but some companies do. But you sort of have this career progression path, which basically suggests you have more and more responsibility. And I'll go through each aspect of that. But essentially, there's an IC path, right? Like, which is, there is a path to be a very, very successful PM without managing people. But you sort of grow on complexity and impact. But at some point, sort of in the middle of your career, I would say, or in some cases, in sort of the uh, even I would say about 5, 6, 7 years in for some people even earlier, some people later. You get to this fork where you need to decide how are you going to grow your career? Are you going to manage people, or are you going to just continue down the complexity path? And I think once you start managing people, you get down this route of like group PM, directors, VPs, and then eventually chief product officer. Um, the question is, how do you think about the dimensions of your career as you look at this? Um, every company, every sort of job ladder has different sort of ways to look at it. But I kind of think of this on 6 dimensions: impact, complexity, vision. I call this product sense. Sort of the way we think about it is like, how much vision do you have? How much insight do you have? how good are you at designing things, designing products, and thinking about people. Um, Communication, which I think is really critical as a PM, and then leadership, and then execution. Now, as I go through the ladder, I'm going to talk about how each of these things apply to sort of one of these each of these ladders. Actually, just to see how folks are doing, let's say I start out with an associate product manager, and you guys can use the chat to answer this. What do you think is the most important part, or the most important dimension, if you start out as an associate product manager? Any guesses? Communication, that's a good one. Execution. Oh, I think I know game. Right. No, I think to start with, it's execution, right? So when you start out as at the start of your career, we think about how good are you at getting things done. And the way to think about it really is let me is to start to begin with. A solution is almost handed to you, right? So when you're fresh out of school, we literally say, "Hey, game." We literally say, "How? Here's a problem. Here is exactly how to solve it. Uh, can you make sure you go ahead and solve it?" And so I'll go and talk about each of these dimensions. Um, Next slide. There we go. Um, I'll start with impact. So at Google, we generally break impact into two parts: personal and product. Um, I define personal impact as if you weren't there, what would have happened, right? If we replaced this person with another product manager, would things have been exactly the same? If there wasn't a product manager, what would have happened? And would things have been would you have had the same impact, or would something be very different? And the second is you think about impact of the project, like what impact did it have in the world? So in the first case, if you think about an APM, the things I would expect someone to say is, oh, because this person was around, um, or sort of, if you think about an APM, I'm kind of expecting it's a small feature essentially of the project, or a small part of it. It's not the entire project. Once you go up to a principal product manager, I'm kind of expecting, without that person, you know, a product area wouldn't exist. The industry would have been different. Your company is dependent on the contributions of this person. And similarly, when you sort of go up the management ladder, I'm expecting, especially at a director level or a VP level, that person is managing, coaching, and mentoring people that you can say that about, right? Like, without this person on this person's team, this company would not exist. This would not work. Um, and so as you grow through your career, right? So the thing to think about is, how much impact am I having? Is the product I'm working on like progressively getting more important, progressively changing things? Second is, outside of that, is this something where I am required, right? I've seen many product managers at small companies, at larger companies, get stuck in a trap where the product is really impactful. And so they feel like they're having impact, but they themselves aren't like uniquely positioned to actually make a difference. So think about two things. How much of an impact is your product having in the world, and how important are you to that project? What unique things are you bringing? Both of the things are incredibly important. The second part is complexity. Um, Over time, you have to be drawn to more complex things, and complexity can come from many different dimensions. One way to measure complexity is how many engineers are working on the thing that you're working on. Is it big? Does it require a lot of technical skills? Another thing is, how complex is the industry? Is the industry dynamic? A lot of people assume when we say complexity, it's like, it has to be a big product, or it has to have many people working on it. One of the most complex products I've seen someone work on, essentially for a while, had one engineer and one PM on it. And some of the other things, around complexity and legal things, uh, um, are sort of even more complex, right? So like I've seen someone, who's almost a director basically, who works purely, sort of by himself. There's no engineers. He primarily thinks about legal things, but it's incredibly complex because he has to understand how the industry works. He has to understand how, tens of other product works. So think about, am I working on things that are even more complex at every single point? This is the hardest sort of PM skill. So at Google, we sort of bucket it in sort of the product bucket, and sort of call it some combination of vision, insight, and design. The way to really think about it is, am I getting better at designing great products? Am I getting better at understanding the nuances of why do people like something? And what can I build that makes them like it even more? Now, as you think of progression, right? So when we think about, someone that's fresh out of school or fairly new in their career, um, this is it's some people just have it out of the gate, right? I've seen some people that are, start out fresh in their career and are just able to nail sort of, okay, this is what people want, and it's either because they understand the audience really well, they just have really good product instinct and intuition. But if you don't have it, it's something that's, a skill set that needs to get built over time. Do you understand and study user behavior over time? Do you know how to run focus groups? Do you know how to conduct effective interviews of candidates? Have you seen patterns before? And especially on the leadership ladder, that's what I see a bunch of, right? Which is, I think, really good leaders, especially if you've been doing this for a while, if you've been sort of in the product space for a while, you learn to pattern match in a way that's really constructive. Which is, you say, like, okay, this I don't have time to go deep and understand, sort of real user needs in each of these things, but I recognize this pattern and I think this might work. So I'm going to guide my team to go explore this thing. And so this notion of, do you have insight? Do you have a pulse on whoever your customer is? I think that's critical. And that's something sort of, I think, is when I interview product managers, when I work with them, that's the thing that I value the most. Are people able to have this, and is this there? Um, Communication increasingly, I would say, is a critical part of the PM job. When you start out early in your career, it looks very different, and as you sort of rise, it looks very different. And communication is multiple things. It's, how crisp are your product requirement documents? It's how compelling are your presentations? Are you able to convince people? But it extends beyond that, right? Like, it extends to when you present to your senior leadership. What is the confidence you project? Are you able to bring them along with your story? Are you a good storyteller, basically? It can even be something as little as, like, are your emails effective? One of the best PMs I've worked with, um, he, essentially, the easy way to say it is his emails were for way too long, right? So a VP would come to me and say, I just could not read. Like, I thought what he was saying was right, but like the email was 5 pages long. I never got to it. So are you able to bubble up the right details at the right level, so that you can convince whoever you need to convince? And this is at a large company. At a smaller company, the set is different. Are you able to convince customers? Are you able to convince external partners? Are you able to convince your CEO? All of those things start mattering quite a bit. Um, the PM job is unique. And so this is actually across the board of the ladder. You have to be a really, really good leader. And you have to be a leader that, in most cases, will not be actually managing the people directly. So nobody really has to listen to you. You get some sort of natural credit because, you have a job and your title is product manager, but that's rarely sufficient, right? Like, why should people listen to you? Why should, people in sales? Why should people in product management? Why should they spend time sort of understanding what you're doing, and sort of follow along? So that's a critical sort of skill that you need, and it looks very different, right? So when you start out as an APM, You can help in simple ways by like, sort of taking notes for the team, making sure project stuff gets done well. But as you rise up, like the team should feel this trust of like, yes, we will follow this person as they go along their product route. This is something that we are excited to do, that we want to do. And again, at as you get to more senior levels, especially once you switch to the management ladder, um, the roles become fungible, right? Like I always kind of say, like a good eng director, a good PM director, even to some extent a good UX director have interchangeable roles. They understand what the other function does well enough that you're able to pick it up, that you're able to sort of help each other, step in for each other much more easily. The final part is execution. So, I said this about the APM role, and uh, it to start with, what the best way you can help the team is if they have a plan and they're executing on it, let's make sure that they execute it well, right? So a strategy has been defined. You know who the people are. You know the way the team works. Can you optimize that so things get done? You ship the product you want to ship. You hit the milestones you want to hit. Um, and honestly, you're just a really, really strong program manager early on. As time goes on, all of this changes, right? Which is the things that we expect PMs to be responsible for aren't just okay, the stuff gets delivered, but it's delivered with really, really high quality. Everyone that delivers it not only feels happy about what they delivered, but they love how they deliver it, right? They're super excited to like actually sort of deliver this thing. One of the best compliments I ever got was, it was very early on in my PM career. I didn't actually think I was doing that good a job, but about 4 or 5 months in, I asked my engineering lead, "Hey, how do you think I'm doing? Are things okay?" Or maybe this was earlier, maybe even 2 or 3 months in. He said, "Yeah, things are good. Like I like the way the product direction is going, but the main thing is like, I'm really happy. The team is a lot happier with you around." And this really surprised me because I didn't think I was doing anything. And then I realized like there's a certain energy, there's a certain just cadence that product managers bring, which can lift your entire team. And so that's something to remember as a product manager. You're often a force multiplier on the entire team, and so you can help them in that way. Um, I'll take questions on any of these, by the way, later. And if you have questions, feel free to push them in. But I'll move on to a separate topic, which is never expect growth to be linear. So, one of the false sort of things that comes in with the ladder is people have this idea that, I'll start doing things this way. I'll get better at it. I'll get a little bit better, then I'll go to the next level. Then I'll get a little bit better. I'll go to the next level. That's rarely the case, right? So when I think about, as I mentioned, you should absolutely plan to get better and have more sort of progress on every dimension of the product ladder. But you should rarely expect that the progress that you make is linear, right? So this is a graph that one of my managers once showed me, that I think his manager showed him, which is, they said, this is again like, imagine someone's on a PM career, right? The first level is, P stands for problem, S stands for solution, H stands for how, and E stands for execute, right? So when you're early on as a PM, right, like everything is handed to you, right? You're said, here's a problem, here's a solution, here's how you do it, here's exactly how, now please go execute this thing. And this is, I'll help you and check in on you as you execute things. And this is where, a lot of people spend time. Then in time, we just stop telling you how to execute things. Then we sort of just define a problem, and we think this is a solution space, and we want the PM to go figure it out. And then finally, we just at some point, hand you, we're like, hey, this is the problem. Can you go figure out what to do? And then like at some point as a PM, you get to the question mark right at the top of the y-axis, which is, this is an area. Maybe there's something, maybe there's not. You should go look at this. And that's where I think you want to get to as a PM. And you can kind of imagine that you have this sort of ramp up at almost every level of the PM ladder. But the key is never expect to get a little bit better on like every month. Most people, if you can kind of see this S curve, have this jump, right? Which is, you sort of are doing things, and then one day or sort of over a week or so, you suddenly figure out how to do it, and something flips in your mind. right? So the thing to look for is for that moment of insight. Am I getting better? Have I figured something out uniquely in this that now I'm on? Now I get this thing. Now I'm ready for the next level as a product manager. Um, Another question I have, actually, let me see if how folks in the chat feel about this, which is, do you imagine you're going to be, let's say, whatever domain you work on, do you imagine you're going to stay in the same domain for a very long time? Or do you imagine you're going to be a product manager, or if you're in some other function, are you going to sort of change domains, right? Are you going to go to a different industry? Are you going to, um, yeah, like, are you going to be in the same industry or a different industry? I guess. Let me ask it that way. Throw stuff in the chat. Same, all right? So Tom's going to be the same. Abhishek's going to be the same. Cool. Change is possible, all right? So I think that's one dimension that you should think about, right? Which is, do you want to be a specialist or a generalist? Uh, I There's someone who started their career almost exactly the same time I did, and for the first, I would say, 7 or 8 years of my career, I changed jobs quite a bit, right? Like it was all within Google, but I worked on YouTube, then I worked on ads, then I worked on games, then I worked on payments, and I worked back at YouTube. Somewhere in the middle, I worked on Chrome, and this person had stayed on ads all of that time. And the trade-off over there was he was a lot more senior than I was, even though we started our careers at about the same time. And I was like, hey, give me some advice. How should I think about staying in one place and growing a career? And he had the opposite reaction. He's like, oh, this is really interesting. He's like, yes, I've grown my career, but give me advice on how you moved around and like learned all these different domains. There isn't a right answer to either of these things. Um, so I think I have a game of snakes and ladders up here, which is, eventually you want to get to the end. And there are these zigzag paths you can take to get there. But it's really important to know what you think about and what you value. And I would say at different points in your career, you should think about different things. Some people love an industry, right? So in this case, Tom and Abhishek are saying, look, I'm going to stay in the same domain, and I'm going to work on this. And so I think there you're saying, okay, I'm going to be a domain expert. I'm going to spend a lot of time understanding the industry deeply, and people are going to come and value me for that. On the other hand, right, if you move around, you get this surprising breadth. You see patterns across different domains and industries. But the skill that you need to be building are these generalist PM skills. People often ask me, hey, I've been a PM on enterprise. Can I come and be a consumer PM? Or I'm a consumer PM. Can I go be an enterprise PM? Or can I switch from being a sort of user interface focused PM to being sort of a backend or technical PM? All of these things are possible. It obviously depends a little bit on personality and sort of your interests, but it also requires you being conscious about, okay, this is a change I want to make, and this is how I want to make it. The other part I would say is what scale of a company you're in. PMing at a very large company is very different from PMing at a small company. Each company sort of has their own sort of subculture. And that is something to be extremely aware of, right? So for example, I would say if you spend time at a large company, being aware of how to influence others and leadership and communication becomes far more important than it would, so let's say, at a smaller company where everyone knows each other and people can sort of get past sort of if you have sort of gaps in communication, etc. So each of these skills, right, like depending upon what you want to do and what you value at different times, is something you should think about. And there isn't like the thing that I will also say is uh, the answer changes for each person over time. So for example, someone I know really well, spent a long career in tech. Something about, I would say about 15, 20 years in their career, they decided, actually, I think, biotech is important. It's going to be very critical going forward. So I'm going to try and get a job there. And it means that, I probably need to take a little bit of a pay cut for a while, or, sort of start at a lower level. But I think it's the right long-term thing to do. And so again, it's important to think about what you value, how you think about your career growth in each of these areas. Um, Product is often a start. So I found this on the internet a couple of days ago. This guy's name is Johnny Kim. He, by the age of 37, he trained as a Navy SEAL. He became a doctor from Harvard, and was also a trained, qualified NASA astronaut. And the reason I say this, I don't encourage all of you to change careers a bunch of times, but I think product is an amazing training ground for a lot of other things. Um, and over my career, I've seen people in product management shift to many, many different jobs and to many, many different sort of things as they manage their careers. And I found that, people, when I started, answering, I would say the first time I seriously started answering this question of, what should I do with my career? What is the path for a PM? Was about 12 years ago, right? Like, I think, especially students would ask me, like, how should I think about my career in the long run? And my answer I've only added to my answer in the last 10 years, right? Because I feel like the options in front of PMs have changed quite dramatically. So the first thing I would say is the most common path that I see in product managers still is the linear path, right? Which is you rise up either as an individual PM, or you rise up on the management ladder. That is still the most common part. The thing I've also seen, especially because the product management job gives you opportunity to change industry and domains really often. So I find that PMs, once they get to especially the mid-level, the way they sort of refresh their careers, or they find new opportunities, is they go to some other sort of company that has a similar problem, but at a lower scale. And so they either come in with more responsibility in a smaller company, or in other cases, they go to a company where they can use their skill set and it applies to sort of a slightly new business, and they have impact that way. The key thing over there is, I would say, if you're thinking about changing jobs, if you're thinking about something, or you're taking on a new project, be very intentional about it. What are you hoping to get out of it? I still think, a lot of people, product management is a great training ground for decision making. So a lot of people that I actually see, a lot of people on my teams have actually told me, hey, I want to do product management for a few years, but then I want to go start my own company. And I find that to be still a very common pattern, where folks either want to go as a very senior product role at a startup after a few years, or they want to start their own company and try and do something. So I think that's another really common pattern. Increasingly, I find a lot of product managers want to, once they sort of learn this decision-making skill, apply it to completely different jobs. So I've seen product managers become engineering managers, move to partnerships, move to operations, in a couple of cases, lead large sales teams. And this grounding of product actually helps them do each of these things. I've also seen them change industries. So a lot of people sort of end up going to venture capital or things of that sort. So I think it's a great start to think about, okay, now that I have this base, how do I maximize it? Again, I don't recommend like this guy changing careers 3 times, even though it's incredibly impressive, but it is something that's possible, right? Like something for you to think about. That was my last slide. I'd love to take questions that people have about how they think about their career, about how they manage things. Yeah. And, and I think Medha might want to come in and say something at the end as well, but I'm happy to start taking questions that folks have.
Satyajit, if you have the next slide already on this one.
I do.
All right. Yes, that helps. Thank you so much for wonderfully covering each aspect of your talk. And I'm sure there are loads of questions people have for you individualistically. And what I have to tell you is that this session was powered by upGrad. We at upGrad are a leading global higher education provider, and we partner with amazing world-class universities all across the world to help you upskill in domains of product management, data science, machine learning, software development, management programs, etc. And for our product management program, we've partnered with Duke CE. And this program essentially is about 6 months long uh, with the ability of you taking other specializations. We have experts of the likes of Satyajit who help you plan your career better, even if you want to transition into product management from a different industry right now or a different function right now, or you want to accelerate your career from a junior product manager to a senior product manager, right? And the different ways in which we get that done is helping you understand the whole domain through courses which are listed on the slide here: building a product strategy, product design, prototyping, product planning, launch strategy, product analytics and engagement, and eventually working with teams. A lot of examples that Satyajit shared today sort of fit into different parts of these courses. And we do so by giving you industry relevant examples so that you have a complete understanding of what's happening in the industry. And this is not just theory. So we all, at the end of the program, we also have a capstone project, which is essentially giving you a problem statement like, what if you were to create a product like Zomato? What would the features of that product be? And you then get to go through each of these different courses that you've already cover the entire journey, right, from design, prototyping to planning and launch strategy. And you do it with an industry example. So that is the wonderful part of the program. And with that, I'd like to open the floor for Q&A. All right. We don't see any questions in the Q&A box. Did Satyajit like get a 5 on 5 because you don't have any questions for him like we used to do back in school, right?
I'll take it.
That is amazing. All right. So we still have about 20 minutes into the session. While our audience thinks of questions that they have to ask you and they want to really carve out a very beautiful question. Satyajit, I think I'll shoot some questions we've been asked in
Yeah.
the past. The first one is I am somebody from a commerce background, and I've been working in as a marketing manager, right, for the past 4 years. Now, what if I want to transition? Like, does not having an engineering background really become a deterrent? And B, if I want to transition from like marketing to product marketing and product eventually, or
Yep.
directly from marketing to product, I mean, what would your recommendations be?
Yeah. I actually I don't think you need an engineering background to be a product manager. I think even in a tech company, I think it's uh, so I think if you think about what a product management job is, right? Like it's all of these things, right? Which is defining what the product is, defining success, helping the team get there, leadership, execution, insight, all of those things. None of those necessarily require a technical background. I think historically what's happened is a technical background is helpful because most of the time you're working with engineers, and sometimes especially it's useful to understand the underlying technology or the challenges in building it. So I think uh, the long-term answer is, I think you've got to develop a curiosity for technology, know how to work well with engineers, have a genuine sort of uh, I say a question for a minute, I'll answer that. But have a genuine curiosity for the technical side. And the practical side, right? How do you move from being a marketing person to a product person? I think in general, if you some of the most successful product managers I've worked with have generally started on a different job ladder and then transitioned over. And the way they've done it is okay. Like it's easier to do it in the company you're in with the team you're in because they say like, oh, this person's actually very good. they want to be a product manager. Let's, maybe they can do a part-time project initially and then eventually transition. So if that's not possible, what I've seen many people do is use that expertise to go to a different industry, right? Or sorry, in the same industry, go to a different company. So for example, there's a friend of mine who has worked in finance for a really, really long time, wanted to transition to product management. It wasn't possible within the company he was in, but what he was able to do is, he found this other company that needed someone that was a product manager, but understood like the finance, like understood that domain really well. And he was able to convince them, through the interview process that, hey, he would learn that part, but they should give him a chance because he understood the domain so well. So I would say those are the two dimensions to think about as you transition. Understand technology really well, and then whatever skill set you have, how can you apply that to the job? Is there a job where the fact that you have that skill set is very valuable, so they'll give you time to learn the product skill set.
Great.
Um,
Is negotiation one of them? Like, I think soft skills as well as
it
a
is.
skill.
It is. Honestly, it's especially everyone has this. When you're hiring someone in a dream scenario, like most managers would want to hire someone that has exactly done the job that they need you've done before, right? So there's a certain amount of communication and sort of selling skill that you need to say, okay, even though I don't have the skill set, here's why you should believe I will do this better. So it's a skill that's part of it, right? So it's more than negotiation. It's selling, which by the way is an important communication skill as a PM. So it's having that is really good. Um, like I remember there was this venture capital firm that kind of they didn't actually tell you how to interview there, right? They kind of figured, look, part of being a venture capitalist is building connections and like getting in. And I think on their side they actually had something like, we have this role open. If you want it, figure out a way to get in, and like have a conversation. That's something obnoxious like that. But it was, I don't know if it worked, but it's I understood like why they were saying that. All right, so there's a question that I see, which is, what's your advice to become for an internal product manager to move to be a B2C product manager? Um, so I can tell you from my experience, I've done it. I've had people on my team make that transition a few times, and I've seen it on a bunch of other people. I think the main thing, the question that I answered, I actually sort of, it's very relevant to what Medha just said, right? Like, which is, you have to convince. So you need to believe that you'll be good at it, and B, then you have to convince the person hiring you why you'll be great at it. And so, in some sense, the skill set in some ways is actually really similar, right? Which is, you need to understand the customer. Um, you need to understand the customer really well. You need to sort of understand how users are using the products to get really good at analysis and all of those skill sets. And so understand the skill set that you have, or is needed in the other job, and demonstrate that you're doing some of it already. So I've seen that, Prashant, I don't know if that's sort of career change you're thinking about, but I've seen that happen a lot, right? Which is people that are doing well sort of change, get the opportunity to move somewhere else. Because they're like, okay, look, we trust this person can execute well in this environment. They seem to understand what's required to like be a good B2C consumer manager. Let's give them a shot. So I'd say the number one thing is demonstrate sort of excellence in your existing job, and then that makes it easy for people to take a chance on you, even if you haven't done something else, right? Especially if you're moving within the company.
Right.
Um,
All
Game has
right.
a question.
There's one on the Q&A box.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the question is, you spoke of a moment of energy in your career when you realized the energy you brought to the team was a contribution in itself. Beyond personalities, what are things that you have created dynamic? Yeah. So I think an underrated part of being a product manager is people look to you for leadership, and people turn to you when sort of you're a natural sort of you have to be a sort of a force multiplier in the team. So I think personality is one of them, right? Which is uh, I remember there was a PM who was really, really good, right? Like did the pieces of the job really, really well, but was always in a really grumpy mood. And it didn't really affect me much, right? Like because he was on my team, I thought he did a really good job. I actually really enjoyed working with him. But some of the eng leads that when I was checking in with engineering leads, um, they kind of said, oh, there's this person is so cynical. He's kind of bringing down the team with him, even though like no one had questions about the decisions, the quality, all of that stuff. So I will say personality is a little underrated. The second thing is process, right? So when I joined this role, for example, the team didn't have daily stand-ups, right? So I would so the team, what we started doing then was, sort of we had these stand-ups every other day, right? So we met Monday, Friday, and it was a small team, so we just, stood around essentially on the floor for 10 minutes, and we all just went in a circle and said what was happening. And the things that I was doing that weren't happening before was I was actually telling people the broader perspective, right? So we had a few engineers, a designer, and manager, and a few other people, and I found that a lot of the engineering team at the time didn't actually understand the broader context of what was going on with their product. So they would say like, "Hey, I built this and this and this, and this will come tomorrow." And the thing I was doing was giving them a sense of, okay, here's how everything fits into the bigger picture. Here's what really matters, and that helped them sort of shape the work that they were doing. And so that was really important for that team. And yeah, I think that was one of the things that the person sort of valued.
I mean, if I'd like to add there, for those of us who have transitioned into different organizations during the pandemic and haven't met a lot of our folks, right? I myself started off as a product marketing manager and now doing a strategy role. It became so difficult to communicate the exact requirement and the reasoning behind all your actions because the time in that meeting is so limited, right? Or and the
Yeah,
different aspects of Satyajit bringing, he's bringing in the energy and everything. That becomes, you don't have the space to do it in a virtual environment. So other
yeah,
aspects that become critical are how clearly are you prioritizing your tasks, and so that it becomes, and how clearly are you communicating the changing priorities as well, because with business priorities change. So that's something a product manager is also looked up to for, right? Where
yeah,
you
100%.
continuously communicate, even in virtual environments like these.
Yeah, um, as a PM, it's very rare that you can actually over communicate, right? So send out updates, send out stuff, let people know what's happening. So I think that's actually, especially to your point, especially right now, I think it's really, really important.
Right. We have one from Sudarshan. Nowadays, we see specific product managers like growth PM, data PM, tech PM. How is this going to change in the coming years? Do we have like a generic PM, or should we be something specific to grow?
Um, I think there's going to be some interchangeability between all of this. I do think it's true, right? Like I think there is um, the example I gave, and by the way, I think every um, every large company does this in different ways. Every sort of startup. So let me say this: if you go to the smaller company, all these roles kind of merge into one because it's just sort of people don't have that scale. But even I would say at this point, almost 17, 18 years ago, when I interviewed at a more mature company versus an earlier stage company, you saw these differences, right? So when I this was when I was still in school, I interviewed at Microsoft. Microsoft had this clear sense of like there's a go-to-market PM that's a lot like a product marketing manager. There is a technical PM that works with engineers. There's a product planner that does a lot of planning. Whereas at the time, Google was a less mature company, so they're like, okay, we've got one job description called product manager, and we've got to do all of these things. Um, I think Amazon always had this strong sense of like, hey, there are technical product managers and there's sort of business product managers. I do think in an ideal world, you're able to flex in all those directions. But to your point, I don't think uh, this is one of those domain versus. I think it's always going to be possible to switch amongst these, right? So I think um, at some point you develop so much expertise. For example, I think if you're a developer facing PM, right, you're building developer tools for like let's say 5 6 years. I think to make a leap to a consumer product, you have to convince someone, hey, I'm all these skill sets that I've applied, all the generic skills, I can move over here. I don't think it affects growth. I think if anything, it's what I mentioned earlier in my talk, right? Like, which is it's a game of snakes and ladders. I think you can always jump up, you can change things, you can move around. But if for example, like you're moving from a technical PM to a growth PM, maybe your expertise is lower, so you're starting a little bit lower on the run and expect to have some time to ramp up. So I do think sort of that movement will happen. Um, yeah, but I think it's very possible. I don't think those are permanent sort of classifications, but I do think in general, right, like I'm seeing more and more specialization earlier on. That is definitely true.
My
But
like my follow-up question to that would be, do I need to have a little bit of everything in order to be like the director?
100%, you have to. I think you can't, especially once you sort of. I would say even to be a senior PM, right? Like you can't not understand data. You can't not have an understanding of how what growth PMs do. And so I would say you have to be a good PM, you have to know a little bit of these, of all of these. And I think at some point the question is there one that you like more than others? Is there one that you're better at more than others? So you specialize more and spend more time there.
Right. So Darshan, like even at upGrad, a lot of my colleagues do take up different roles with different projects. So for this project, which is 6 months of duration, they're a growth PM. The next opportunity that comes in, which is really challenging, so they try to grab, say, the tech PM role, right? So there's always an opportunity, an avenue when you get to understand the company better and you've been there, and you always try to uh, get better at it, right? Like as Satyajit was saying, you're as good as the last project or as your last performance that you did, and that is what would help you in the next interview that you want, or even the next role switch that you want internally. So keep trying at it, and as he also mentioned, you will eventually find out what really like suits you the best, and maybe your ikigai and then you
Yeah.
will really be the master in that. Prashant is asking, would you have any tangible tips on how one can move into a new domain without prior experience in that domain?
Yeah, I think there you have to show passion for the domain, and like people need to understand why why they should hire you, right? Which is, and again, I think it's very common, right? Like I think it's okay. It's the thing you need to demonstrate is you need to demonstrate like the management skills, right? Like, look, I can do this well. In the case of a PM job, look, here are documents I've written, or here's analysis I've done. Here's my track record overall. But then if you want this, sort of, it's a domain that you don't have experience in. I think you 100% should be able to convince someone that you're passionate about the domain, that you understand it, you've spent some time studying it, you sort of you understand the dynamics of how things work. And I think I think I would say that's the way to do it, right? Which is spend time, be able to convince the person that look, I care about this enough, that I know it well enough that I want to move in, right? So talk to people, who have that job, understand what they care about, read online about it, like get a sense of that thing and show them that you've done the work, and that's the best way to do it.
So being proactive essentially is
Yeah,
what is the underlying point here. And when you're proactive, you talk to the person who reports to this senior PM or this director PM, right?
yeah,
And then you try to figure out, okay, what's this one exciting problem that you're solving? you see if that really fits into where you want to be. Then you try to deep dive into where could your maybe skill sets be helpful, and that you only get to know after you ask as many questions, you do research on your part to present yourself as the right candidate.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, and I think we don't have any more questions on the Q&A box. There is one question that we also get asked, Satyajit, is how and where do I upskill from, right? There's so many options available. Do I absolutely need to have, say, a certificate from somewhere to validate that? Or can I just be a part of some exciting groups, some resources that you would like to refer people to?
Um, I honestly, the answer is very different for each person. Like a lot of it is, how much time do you have? How much effort do you want to make? Like, what are the constraints on your time and pieces, right? Like, obviously, you guys offer classes and certificates, right? I think that's valuable. That's a sort of a way to sort of show that look, I've spent significant amount of time and have met a certain bar. I think that's important. Um, but also, I think it's the 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 thing I will say is it's really important to be conscious of your own development, right? So if it's classes on a certain dimension, certificates is one way to do it, but marking out some time and marking out some amount of energy to like keep going, whether to your point, like there's no, in my case, I read a lot online. I subscribe to a whole bunch of different PM newsletters. I should like at some point draw a collection of them. None of them are coming. Like I don't know the actual websites. I can refer to the people. I follow a lot of people that I think are really good at product on Twitter, and I frankly just read a lot, and at this point almost subconsciously think about why does this product work this way? How is this How is this happening? But I think being that's one way to do it. Um, I take small classes from time to time. For example, at some point I realized like so one person on my team led a class on how to use Figma a little while ago, and I realized like, oh, at some point, like I use it. I rarely sketched myself for many years, but when I did, I used a completely different set of skill sets, tool sets, and I think that's the part where you have to. There's this mix of staying up to date and sort of formally taking classes that you need to keep doing. Because the risk otherwise is so. For example, I was on Google search I'm on Google for quite a long time. About 5 years into my job, uh, a new person joined the team, and they asked me, okay, how do I do this thing? So this person was reported to someone that reported to me, and I said, oh, the way you do this is you look at this analysis and you look at this tool, and you do this other thing, and then like that person manager said, actually, all those tools have been deprecated now. The last time you did this was like clearly 5 or 6 years ago. We just have a complete we still do the same things, but it's a completely different tool set. And I was like, oh great. And so I think that's the thing you should be aware of, right? Which is even if you know how to do some things, the tools to do it often change. And so it's useful to keep on the pulse of those things. Otherwise, you start to give people more and more irrelevant advice. Sometimes the framework is sufficient, right? So the things that I told him to get worked for him, he was able to do it. He just used a different set of tools.
Right.
But it's important to be aware of that. So, sorry, that was a long answer to your question. But I think the thing I'll say is it's really important to carve out time to upskill. Classes are one way to do it. Following a bunch of resources that you think are good are a way to do it. But marking out the time is really important.
Absolutely. So, upskilling and lifelong learning is the answer to that question. And all of you, let us know how you found this session, and if you'd like to receive communication from us for future sessions. Meanwhile, I am also sharing here the link for our product management program in the chat box so that you can refer to it at your own free time and see if this actually fits into your upskilling needs. All right. So everybody giving you, all right, you're 4.9 right now, Satyajit. So the
I'll
result.
take it.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening, a great day. and look forward to having you on many more sessions with us. And Satyajit, looking forward to conducting another one with you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. This was a lot of fun. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.